Child definitely begins in a state where there is no ego. And then about the fourth year or before, but about that time, the child develops a sense of ego, I, myself. And that is, in the first place, a certain identity with the body.
You think you're in control, don't you? You believe that the decisions you make, the thoughts you think, the emotions you feel, all of this is a result of your conscious will, your reason. But what if I told you that this is precisely the illusion that is destroying your life? That this you, who thinks they are in command, is just a mask, and behind it there is something much deeper, neglected and hungry for attention. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to confront you. Because if you're watching this video, it's because on some level, you feel, that something is wrong, something is out of place. No matter how much you try to keep up appearances, no matter how much you tell yourself that everything is fine, you live tired, anxious, trapped in repetitive cycles that you don't understand. Maybe you are too hard on yourself. Maybe you live seeking approval. Maybe you have everything that others think is success, but still feel empty. Do you know why? Because the ego, this fragile construct you call I, is in control, and it is dragging you away from your essence. Carl Jung did not see the ego as an enemy, but as a limited part of the psyche that believes it is greater than it really is. And when you believe that the ego is all that you are, you enter an invisible prison. You start to live for an image, a persona, a character created to survive the expectations of others. And in this process, you disconnect from your soul, from your truth, from your shadow, from everything that would truly make you whole. You begin to adapt, to control, to manipulate, and you call this maturity. But what you are really doing is avoiding confrontation with who you really are. And do you know what the consequence of this is? Superficial relationships, self-sabotage, existential crises, a constant fear of failing, of being rejected, of not being good enough. All of this is a symptom of an inflated ego, and at the same time, frighteningly fragile. But today, I want to show you what Jung saw behind this illusory structure. In this video, we will perform an autopsy of the ego. We will tear apart this layer of lies you have been telling yourself. And in the end, maybe, just maybe, you will begin to understand who you really are. Are you ready for this? Because what comes next will not be comfortable, but it could change your life. Before anything else, we need to clearly understand what we are facing. The ego, for Carl Jung, is not the villain, but it is also far from being a hero. It is, in fact, the center of your consciousness, the reference point by which you say, I am. But here's the problem. The ego believes it is everything. And when you believe that too, you limit your existence to what is visible, controllable, and safe. The ego is the part of the mind that constructs your social identity. It chooses what to show the world, what to hide, what is acceptable to feel or desire. It edits your story, manipulates your memories, distorts your emotions, all to maintain a coherent narrative. But this coherence comes at a very high cost. You need to amputate parts of yourself to fit into the idealized image that the ego has constructed. Since childhood, you have been taught to mold yourself, to repress anger, sadness, envy, fear, to smile when you wanted to cry, to obey when you wanted to scream, to be who they expected you to be, even if that meant betraying who you really were. And who was in charge of this process? The ego. It was created to protect you from pain, rejection, and shame. But along the way, it forgot that it was just a messenger, and began to behave like the king. Jung said that the ego is just a small island in the vast ocean of the psyche, a tiny fraction of your totality. And yet, it is the one that decides what is right or wrong in you. It is the one that judges, compares, separates, and clings to labels like, "I am this way," or "that is not for me." But none of this is true. This is just conditioning. The ego lies, and it does so all the time. It says you are independent, but lives for approval. It says you are rational, but fears being exposed. It says you are strong, but cannot bear criticism. It says you are unique, but spends the days trying to fit in. And the cruelest part, it convinces you that all of this is freedom. You start to confuse personality with essence. You begin to think that your automatic reactions are your nature. But the ego is not your soul. It's just a mechanism. Useful, yes, but deeply limited. When you confuse it with your true self, you enter an internal battle that never ends. And the more you identify with the ego, the more fear you feel of losing control. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of appearing weak. Fear of not being enough. Fear of not being loved. And this fear is precisely what keeps the ego on the throne. But there is something even deeper. Because the ego, to maintain its power, needs to constantly protect itself. And how does it do that? This is where the persona and the shadow come in. In the next part, we will explore how the ego creates masks to survive, and how these masks are suffocating your authenticity. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You are not who you think you are, at least not entirely. Most of your identity has been built as a shield, a role you learn to play in order to survive, emotionally, socially, psychologically. This role has a name: persona. Carl Jung referred to the persona as the mask we wear for the world. It is the social face of the ego. What you show to be accepted, admired, loved. And let's face it, we all wear masks. From an early age, you learned that certain parts of yourself were inconvenient. That expressing anger was wrong. That feeling envy was ugly. That crying was a weakness. That wanting too much was selfish. So you began to hide all of that, to silence, to filter, to repress. The persona was born from fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of not belonging. Fear of not being enough. And the ego, trying to protect you, created an edited version of who you are. More acceptable, more presentable, more socially functional. You became someone nice, polite, controlled, but you also became someone incomplete, artificial, trapped in patterns that no longer make sense. The problem is that the more you identify with this mask, the further you distance yourself from your truth. And this disconnection comes at a price: anxiety, emotional exhaustion, a constant feeling of inadequacy. You try to appear strong, but feel fragile. You try to show control, but live in internal chaos. On the outside, everything seems under control. On the inside, a muffled scream. And you know what's worse? You don't do this consciously. You believe that this mask is who you really are. And then the ego fulfills its most insidious function. Not only hiding your wounds, but convincing you that they don't even exist. You become a stranger to yourself. You live acting, trying to please, trying to fit in. And with each passing day, you feel further away from something you can't even name, but miss. Jung said that everything the consciousness rejects does not disappear. It is merely pushed into the unconscious, and there, in the darkness of the psyche, what he called the shadow forms. Everything you deny, suppress, and pretend not to feel. All the thoughts, impulses, desires and fears that do not fit the idealized image of the ego end up there. And while you strive to keep your mask intact, the shadow grows, silently and dangerously. And this is where things start to get really serious, because what you reject controls you. What you ignore dominates you. In the next part, we will talk about the silent and often devastating signs that the ego is ruining your life, and you don't even realize it. You think you are living your life consciously, but in reality, you are being driven by impulses you don't understand, reactions you can't control, and decisions that seem like yours, but aren't. The ego, when not observed, begins to steer your existence like an autopilot, disguised as free will. It creates perfect justifications for self-destructive choices, disguises insecurities as strength, and transforms fear into arrogance. And you accept it, thinking this is normal. But it's not. Want to know if the ego is destroying your life? Observe your patterns. Do you constantly seek approval? Do you need others to recognize what you do, how hard you work, how much you endure? This is not strength. It's disguised emotional dependence. The ego desperately needs to be validated because without recognition, it feels threatened. It's as if, without applause, your existence loses meaning. Do you find yourself comparing? Do you feel envy when you see someone better, more attractive, more successful? Or do you feel relief when you see someone worse than you? This is not ambition. It's masked insecurity. The ego measures your worth based on others because it doesn't know another way to assert itself. It doesn't seek evolution. It seeks superiority. Are you afraid of making mistakes? Do you freeze when you need to make decisions? Do you get stuck between 1,000 possibilities, but never choose any? This is not prudence. It's the ego, terrified of appearing weak, flawed, or ridiculous. The ego needs to be perfect because any failure is interpreted as a threat to its image. Do you feel you need to always be right? That you need to have the last word, prove your point, win the argument? This is not logic. It's the ego trying to protect the illusion of control. When someone challenges your ideas, the ego interprets it as an attack on your identity. It would rather lose relationships than lose the argument. Do you self-sabotage, refuse opportunities, push people away, delay important decisions? This is not bad luck. It's the ego afraid of the unknown. Because growing, changing, transforming requires you to let go of the certainties the ego has built. And it prefers a familiar hell to an uncertain paradise. These are just a few signs. There are many others: superficial relationships, an inability to ask for help, unresolved resentments, a vague sadness that has no apparent cause. All of this is the ego in action, silently sabotaging your peace, your self-love, and your freedom. And the more you feed this system, the further you drift from your true essence. You become a prisoner of a false version of yourself. But here's the most painful truth. The ego has no interest in your happiness. It wants control. And for that, it will keep you trapped, dissatisfied, and afraid, as long as it remains in charge. Now that you have recognized the signs, an inevitable question arises. Why is it so hard to change? Why, even knowing that something is wrong, do you continue to self-sabotage, repeat patterns, and run away from yourself? The answer lies in the deep fear the ego has of transformation, and that is exactly what we will explore in the next part.